Welcome to the Always for the New Age podcast, where we weave the threads of traditional living into the tapestry of modern day life. I'm your host, Hannah, and I'm a naturopath, herbalist, and passionate plant lover here to discuss topics such as daily ritual, intentional living, witchcraft, herbal astrology, plus sharing interviews with inspiring guests, and so much more. Thank you for being here, and I hope you enjoy this week's episode. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a podcast review if you enjoy my content. I wish to honour and express my deepest gratitude to the traditional custodians of the unceded land on which I live and record, the Wandjirabara people. I want to acknowledge their elders, past, present and emerging, and their continued connection to the land, sea and community. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Hello everybody and welcome back to the Always for the New Age podcast. As you know, I am Hannah, your host, and today I have the wonderful pleasure of introducing a brand new guest to you. So we're here speaking with Jenn Campus. Jenn is based in Sardinia. She is the author of several books. She's a mother. She's also a podcast host. She's an anthropologist. And she's also a passionate keeper of the old ways, seasonal rhythms, and ancestral connection. So thank you so much for joining us today, Jenn. And it's such a pleasure to have you here. I'm excited to get chatting.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm happy to be here too.
Oh, it's so wonderful you could join. And you're joining all the way from Italy, which is incredible. You're our first guest from that part of the world. It makes the time zones tricky, but it's so cool that that's where you're living and you get to share a unique perspective with us. So I'd love you to get started by introducing yourself a little bit. What's your origin story? Where'd you start? And what is it that you do?
Okay. Well, you gave a little bit in the intro, but so I'm a writer. I guess first and foremost, writing is my most comfortable and preferred mode of communication. So I use my writing for a lot of things, but mostly in these days to research and write about ancient cultures, mythology, folklore, sort of as a way to remind myself and others that we have much to learn from the past. And then, as you mentioned, I'm also a mother of two, and I live in Sardinia. I am American in origin and have been living here for about 5 years.
Wow. Yeah. And I love that you're kind of what you do and, you know, your background is so steeped in mythology and kind of the old folk ways. That is just something that not a lot of us have to the extent that you have that. And so I'm really looking forward to learning a bit more about that as well. But let's talk about the anthropologist thing to start with, because that you're also the first anthropologist to join the show. So I want to know a little bit about how that started and maybe how that has influenced your spiritual path as well.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think I've always been really fascinated by ancient cultures, starting in elementary school when I was really young. I think we studied ancient Egypt and ancient Greece and put on a cool little program where we got to pick like a job that we were doing in this ancient culture. And oddly enough, at that time I had picked a scribe, but it was like a cool way. It was a cool way of like embodying someone from that time, even at a young age. So I think that sort of like spurred on my idea of how we could really learn from people from the past. So I think there was a part of my soul that just recognized that our modern world had lost something or had become disconnected from something valuable, which was, you know, our connection to the land, to the earth, to the spirit world, our ancestors, and the wisdom that they still have for us. So it just, I think, really evolved from there. And as I grew and started learning more about other cultures in school, and especially as an American, learning about the indigenous cultures of America, and just how badly that went down, but also appreciating how they still had such an intact way of relating to land and ancestors and the spirit world, that I became really fascinated with learning more about indigenous cultures in a way to try to bridge that gap between what I thought we have lost in the West, in the modern Western world, and what possibly they could help us remember.
Mm.
So I think so it just naturally came from that curiosity of trying to get back something that I felt was really vitally important to the human race, really.
Yeah. Um, and do you have, like, what is it that you think that, I mean, it's a huge topic. We could talk a whole podcast episode or two
Yeah.
on that in itself, but is there something like a key concept that you think that we're missing? Like, what was it that you identified that these Indigenous cultures have that we have lost in our
It's a
modern world?
yeah, I think it's our perspective, like that sort
Mm.
of, I guess I would call it an animist worldview,
Mm.
where we see ourselves as part of a greater web of life and not separate from nature, because as we know, a lot of the more overarching religions of the day kind of teach that we are separate from nature and that we should
Mm.
dominate nature and control nature and use natural resources at will. Whereas I think most ancient cultures and indigenous groups today still believe that we are just part of the web and that we are ourselves nature and part of nature. And I always say we are the only animals who have forgotten that we're animals. and
Totally.
um, and I think that is really the crux of it for me.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that. I call humans animals all the time, especially babies. I'm like, they're just little animals. If you can
Yeah.
kind of, I know some people struggle with, how do you stay basically sane parenting young kids? And I go, well, they're just little animals. Like they are acting off of instinct and intuition and reading
Mm-hmm.
their environment. They feed off of energy, depending on how you want to look at it and what your beliefs are. They're connected to the divine in a way that we aren't as adults. Sometimes they, can see spirits or feel spirits, hear spirits, and they are just little animals existing without this bias and these notions that we have drummed into us as
Yeah.
we kind of hit school age in particular. And that really ramps up. And, that age of 7, which is really, um, very a big focus in like Steiner education and Rudolf Steiner's
Mm-hmm.
work.
Mm-hmm.
They're just little animals. We're all animals. And if we can just remove that, I guess, superiority complex that we've got going about,
Yeah.
we're like these, these creatures that deserve to, yeah, basically dominate the world around us and everything in the name of progress. And if we can just remove the
Yeah.
ego from it, I
It
think we'd
creates
all be
so much
living
stress
easier.
too.
Totally.
It really creates so much stress for us because we see ourselves from apart from these natural cycles, that if we just allow them to hold us and allow us to find our place within them,
Mm.
so much stress goes away, because then you realize that you cannot control everything and that you do not have the ability to, you know, be in progress all the time. And
Mm.
it just, I think, lets so many things kind of drift away that we feel is so important in our culture. And then we realize actually it's not. And actually letting go of them is better for our own mental states, especially raising kids.
Absolutely. I think I'm 100% there with you. We are, our own worst enemies when it comes to this stuff sometimes. But it also, it's such a journey. It's kind of crazy. Like we get programmed and then we spend, some of us, some lucky ones of us, spend our entire lives deprogramming a few years of damage. And,
Mm-hmm.
that is the story for a lot of people. But thank goodness we have people like you who are sharing kind of this knowledge, this wisdom, and helping people to maybe not leapfrog it, but, find their path
Yeah.
where they may not have before if they're surrounded by people who aren't interested in this, who don't have this understanding, who've lost that connection. So,
Mm-hmm.
speaking of that, your business is called Old Ways for Modern Days, which not only is very appropriate for what you do, but also, our podcast ended up being Kindred Spirits, and I had no idea
Yeah.
when I asked you to come on. So, I
I
think that
love
that's
it.
really cool. But
It's
how did that kind of come about? I mean, I'm getting a vibe as to how that may have happened, but what does that mean to you, this Old Ways for Modern Days in your business?
Yeah, I had to think about that a lot because the name just kind of came to me. I don't know, like how I'm sure you've experienced this, and I'm sure listeners have experienced too, just how things just come out of the ether that just
Hmm.
feel so right and true. And then after that, I spent, even years after I've been using the name, kind of thinking, what does this mean for me? Because I see a lot of people using the term old ways and, and I don't know. I think it means different things to different people. So I
Hmm.
actually really dug deep into what it means for me personally.
Hmm.
And I think it goes back again to this sort of the way our ancestors lived, the unspoken rules of community and reciprocity, and really above all, like a respect for life that I think
Hmm.
was so foundational to the way people used to believe. And I think more than that, old ways means to me the finely tuned wisdom of our ancestors, the wisdom that manifests in us as the unique skills and gifts that we have, that various lineages have passed down to us through the millennia, just
Hmm.
for us. Like, we don't have traits that are useless. They were finely tuned over generations and generations and generations to get to us to continue the work of our lineages, but also the work that we came here to do. So I feel like the old ways are sort of a way to really come back to ourselves and come
Hmm.
back to um, our mission of why we're here, and
Yeah.
to use those gifts that we have, to serve our families and serve our community and serve the greater whole.
Yeah, that
So,
is really beautifully said. I've something that's come up recently that I'm hearing in certain circles is, I mean, this goes around the internet, but things like this, but there's a bit of a hate on the word folklore, which or like folk tradition, or
mm,
and I always, when something like this comes around, I always take a moment to just check in with myself and see if some of that resonates, if I can understand where someone's coming from, because you never want to just dismiss something because you don't know what you don't know.
right.
But something that I have identified that resonates within that is understanding that people should, maybe we should share what our version of folk is, because folk is one of those buzzwords, but
Mm,
what folk tradition are you from? Because you can use folk and it does kind of speak to many different cultures, but what,
mm.
like, cultural folk traditions are you working with? Is your history like Germanic? Is it,
Oh, my
where
person.
is it,
Okay, yeah.
Celtic? Yeah, yeah. So I just wanted to share with people, kind of,
Okay.
who may be thinking
Mhm.
that way, where are these folk traditions coming from? Like, what is your kind of your lens that you're looking through when you're working with folk traditions?
Sure. Okay, so basically, a bit more background on me then to get to that point is that I was adopted as a baby.
Hmm.
And so I grew up in a very strong culturally Italian American family.
Oh, wow.
And
Yeah.
so I have a lot of, like my husband always said, he was like, you were just like meant to be with Italians. I don't know what to tell you. Like,
Yeah,
it's part of your
absolutely.
story.
Clearly.
So I grew up, very culturally Italian American, which is different than Italian. I'm not going to go into that here because that's a whole
Hmm.
other podcast. But in, I think it was 2010, like 2010, 2012, I started trying to research my own origins, like my own
Hmm.
biological roots. Because things like 23andMe started coming out where you could
Yeah.
get, DNA testing and all of that, which is, for somebody who's adopted, is sort of like the most amazing thing in the world, because
Mm.
most people, are not able to actually meet their biological families. And so they have absolutely no way of knowing,
Hmm.
unless, there's some science based way to figure that out. So that's
Yeah.
how it started for me. And of course, my genetic results came back as basically like a 50-50 split between British, Celtic, and Germanic. And
Mm.
then there was like a little bit of Finnish kind of like splashed in there. So I started really, researching those cultures a lot. And I had also spent a year in Norway as an exchange student
Oh,
between
wow.
high school, and college.
Mm,
So at that kind of like formative time of my life, I learned a lot about Scandinavian culture. And
mm,
I already knew a lot of the mythology because, like I said earlier, I was like really into ancient culture. So I sort of learned a lot about different ancient cultures. And my whole life, I knew that there was, even though I had a great family growing up and I love my family, there was always a piece of me that felt like it was missing because I didn't know who I really was or who my people really were, where I really
mm.
came from, which I think is another reason why I studied a lot of cultures, was because I could have been any one of them. And I just wanted to see like what was resonating for me.
Yeah.
And that's a whole other story too, because the resonances that I did have actually were the cultures that I am biologically,
Right.
which is a whole other conversation about nature versus nurture. And
Yeah.
there's so much to go
There's
into.
a lot to unpack there. Yeah. Maybe in another
Yes.
episode we could dive into that. I think that's so interesting.
So those are kind of the lenses, I guess, that I look into things.
Hmm.
And to go back to, the whole folklore buzzword and all of that, the interesting thing is like in Norwegian, and I think in other Scandinavian languages, folk actually just means people.
Yes.
So
Yes,
when you say
absolutely.
people, the actual word for people is folk. So
Hmm.
it's, to me, that's what it's always meant, is, it's the wisdom of the people, the people's
Hmm.
knowledge and the people's wisdom. um so yeah, so that's just a little bit sort of about
Yes.
where I'm coming from.
Thank you for
And the
sharing
lens.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I definitely get the Germanic feel through looking through your social media and like what
Hmm.
you offer. I think that's why I use that term, because I kind of can get that energy from, your teachings and what
Yeah.
you share. And I think it's a tricky one because I've kind of thrown you on the spot there with that question, but it it's it's just something that's been coming up a lot, and I think that Celtic cultures in particular seem to be quite open and
Hmm.
quite willing to accept a lot of different perspectives. And, also we could dive into cultural appropriation. We won't. But I think, Celtic cultures aren't that. I don't think we're that particular about that. But I
Hmm.
understand for different cultures that there's a strong, undercurrent of a lot of pain, and there's a lot of history there, and that's why people are feeling this way. So I just wanted to get
Yeah.
in there so people could actually know like what your background is, because it's also a bit different to mine. I tend to be quite a Celtic background, like Irish, a little bit English, but mostly a very Irish Celtic background. And
Hmm.
so that's where a lot of that's the lens that I'm looking through when I am doing witchcraft or ritual or learning about the wheel of the year, and
Right.
our seasonal cycles. That's my lens. So for people who didn't know that, now they do. That's my background. And so thank you for sharing that again. And
Sure.
like, one thing that I love about what you do is you're very focused on families and how to weave folklore, maybe some paganism, pagan roots, into family life. And that's something I know like a lot of our listeners are either mothers or parents of some description. And that is what they love to learn about is, okay, cool, maybe I have some book knowledge, maybe I have looked on Hannah's social media, I've looked on Jenn's social media, and I'm getting ideas on, how to have like a nature-based spiritual path and craft, and learning about like seasonal observation and how to maybe even little rituals. But how can we bring this into the home?
Hmm.
And I guess how can we weave it into our parenting and the family unit? So yeah, would you talk to that a little bit?
Yes, I think that is of particular interest to me because I can say with 100% honesty that raising my kids with sort of like putting on the animist lens and just sort of looking at kind of what I was talking about earlier, how the old ways are sort of the name for these innate traits and gifts that we come into the world with for a reason,
Mm,
has saved my sanity because
mm-hmm,
it was a very necessary path for me because I'm raising two neurodivergent children. So my daughter, who is 11, is autistic, And my son, who is 9, has very severe ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
And so it took a really long time for especially my daughter's diagnosis to come. We actually just got it this year. So I've been
Mm-hmm.
trying to search for a diagnosis for her for about 9 years. Not because I want to label her, but because she needs support.
Yes, absolutely.
She has high support needs, and she wasn't getting that support because we had no documentation. And so in those years where we were working with professionals of all different kinds and trying to get help and trying to get to the bottom of it, um, I had moments as a mother where I was just like, I actually don't even know what to do anymore. Like, I feel
Mm.
like I am failing my child. I feel like I don't know what to do. And the ancestors came through for me. Like, not, the ancestors, they came through for me. They started talking and showing me things. And they're the ones who were basically saying, you have to look at these traits that she has, that she came into the world with, that are now being labeled as problematic or
Mm-hmm.
like issues that need to be resolved. But you need to look at them with ancestral eyes and say, try to figure out where these traits would have been useful in a different time, in a different
Mm-hmm.
place, so that you can see the truth of them. And I always joke, and help her to use her powers for good. That's my joke. Because she's a very intense person, and she always
Mm.
has been. So many people always asked me when she was growing up, and I would send pictures to family because, of course, I'm living in Italy and they're
Mm.
not. And, they would be like, does she ever smile? She always seems so serious, and I'm just like, well, that's just how she is.
Mm.
But that's not a bad thing. It's not necessarily a bad thing.
Mm.
So the ancestors really, and just using ancestral practices, using this sort of ancestral way of thinking, using the ancestral eyes, I mean, it literally saved my sanity, because I was going down to dark places of, my own baggage and my own wounds of like, I am not a good mother. I don't deserve to have these kids. Like, I don't know how to take care of them. I can't help them. I don't know what to do. And the ancestors were like, nope, you
Yeah.
have all the information that you need. Yes, she needs outside support, because you live in a world where that's really
Yes.
important. But you
Mm.
have everything you need already inside. You just have to dig deep, and you have to completely change your way of looking at all of these things.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, this way of bringing my spiritual beliefs into family life is like really from the foundation
Yeah.
of how I
Yeah.
parent. And it came from necessity. It wasn't like coming from, this is cute and I want to,
Yes.
go out and pick and make flower crowns with my kids, even though that is beautiful. And like, I am
Mm-hmm.
not saying that that's not something you should do, because you absolutely should. Um, but it also comes from a much deeper place of recognizing that we are just the latest models, you could say,
Mm.
of the expression of our lineages. And it's very emotional.
No, it's
um,
emotional for me too.
but
Yeah.
it's so powerful, and it really yeah, it really changed my perspective on what it means to be a parent and a caregiver to these precious beings that have come into my care.
Yeah.
And how am I going to do that? How am I going to do right by them and by this? And it wasn't by torturing my children to fit into the mold that they're supposed to.
Oh,
It
yes.
just wasn't. And it's not.
I know that that's going to resonate with so many people. And it resonates with me coming from a family full of neurodivergent people.
Mm,
My dad,
mm,
myself, my husband is
mm-hmm.
ADHD,
Yeah.
my cousin is significantly autistic on the autistic spectrum. And that, like, I completely
Yeah.
agree with everything that you said. And I wish that more people, and they are, like, it's starting to happen. But, there was such a big gap of time where, again, this damage was done on a societal level. And that stuff runs deep. And,
It does.
again, there's a whole movement of people who are trying to kind of reclaim this. This is why homeschooling
Mm.
statistics, the amount of people homeschooling now is shot through the roof, and it's like, doubling or tripling every year because people are looking for other alternatives because, you know, like we're trying to fit beautiful little children into these molds that were never meant for human beings. And I'm very
Yeah.
passionate about that because also my mom worked in early years education for over 30 years, and she's a phenomenal
Mm-hmm.
teacher. My husband's also a teacher, my cousin's a teacher, my godmother's a teacher, and they
Mm-hmm.
all,
Mm-hmm.
except for my husband, work in early years and have worked in behavior. And getting to see this play out in so many different children in so many different families. There's something very broken about the systems that we live in, and so I love that.
Right.
I don't love that you were in that situation, but I love that the ancestors came in and basically kicked butt and went, "This is the way it is," because like, thank goodness for that. And thank goodness
Yeah.
that you were the kind of person who was able to receive that as well, because I think, again, depending on how much has happened to you throughout your life and through your immediate ancestry as well, how deep the programming is, not everybody will be
Mm-hmm.
open to hearing that message, even if the ancestors are there shouting at the top of their lungs. So,
Yeah.
the fact that you were able to hear that, it was all, meant to happen. And, how amazing for your children that you're able to weave this in that way. So, like,
Yeah.
how does the year flow? So what are some of the, I guess, cornerstone practices that you bring into your family life to make things work and to also have a bit of enjoyment? Because, yes, there's a practical element for you, but also I would imagine that there's also joyful elements that are there for,
Yeah.
pleasure and fun. Because
Definitely.
kids and life and family, and who wants to be sad all the time and, serious all the time. So we want to, like, have some levity. So what are some
Mm-hmm.
of the cornerstone, like, necessary things? And then what are some of the things that you introduce also just for fun as a spiritual family? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think being in nature is like number one because it's something that we all need for our nervous systems
Mm.
in different ways. And so we, have purposefully chosen to live in a place, moving to Sardinia was not, we didn't come for like the beaches. And I mean, the beaches are lovely and they're also nature. So we enjoy them a lot more
Mm.
usually in like the spring and the winter when there's not as many people coming here to visit. But we came and moved here because the pace of life is very different. It's slower. We live in a village of around 2,500 people,
Mm.
and so children are able to have like a childhood here where
Yeah.
they have more independence. They're able to go out in like their little groups, and we're literally surrounded by nature, and it's really important for my kids, I feel, to get that because they are starting to form their own relationships with the land and
Mm.
with certain rocks or certain trees that we have near us. And my daughter loves cats, so we're like collecting cats basically as we have like a collection of cats now. But
I love
she
that.
she really can communicate amazingly with them, and so
Mm.
they help her. But so yeah, so also trying to get more back to the point of your question. Also, Sardinia is a place where there are over 10,000 megalithic sites. I know when people think about sort of stone circles and dolmens and different things like that, they think of the British Isles, which also
Mm-hmm.
has quite a few. But by
Mm-hmm.
sheer number, Sardinia like has a lot more. And so that's part of what we do during the year too, is that we visit different sacred sites to bring offerings and just to spend time, because I also am trying to normalize for my kids that these structures and these things for their ancestors, because they're half Sardinian, they were used in daily life. It wasn't like
Mm-hmm.
they were just like standing there in a field somewhere and nobody ever interacted with them. So
Mm-hmm.
part of what I'm trying to normalize for them now is like how we can kind of not use but interact with these
Work
different
with,
monuments
yeah.
and things, and sort of try to remember what they probably were used for and how people might have used them in the past, to build a greater connection to the land and the spirits and the ancestors. And so we go to visit a lot of different sites. We have our favorites now. I think that we kind of tend to go to at specific times of the year, um, where we, make offerings, leave offerings, and just spend time. Just spend time there, giving our energy back
Mm.
to these places as well. Um, so yeah, I mean, it is really trying to figure it out from the bottom up, and really, I think it's so unique for every person because it really depends a lot on where you live and what the energy is around you, how you want to bring those things into your calendar and into your daily life and into like the seasonal celebrations.
Mm.
And what I try to tell people all the time, whether it's like I'm writing something or doing a podcast or whatever, is that, even the days that are on the wheel of the year, to try to think of them more as seasons, because
Mm-hmm.
it depends on where you live. I mean, you live in Australia, so like it's even like you understand this even more, I think, than people living in the Northern Hemisphere, which is like, you kind of take this basic foundation, which is a good basic foundation, and then you build upon it based on what your experience is as a
Mm.
person, where you live, who your family is, what their interests are, because again, just because we're doing something ancient, like we're trying to do something old ways or ancient or pagan or whatever, doesn't mean that we can also like force our kids into those boxes either.
Yes.
I think sometimes they just don't have an interest in how we want to explore, Yule or something like that. And so
Yeah.
you kind of have to make a space for things to evolve with your family and creating your own traditions with your family too, based on
Mm-hmm.
how everybody kind of jives together with it.
Yeah. I kind of I do really deeply understand that, and I kind of have a unique perspective on that, I guess, because my husband is Canadian, so I really have a foot in both the northern and the southern hemisphere, and so we
Mm-hmm.
kind of our practice is is an interesting one because, and I've shared about this for so many years. Like, sometimes it used to be when I my altar that I used to have, like, back a decade ago in our early relationship, you know, it was actually like half southern, half northern hemisphere. So I'd
Mm-hmm.
have both on there. Half would be like autumnal and half would be spring. And, that was part of me also figuring out kind of what that looked like for us. And also my husband was kind of freshly moved here. Um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and so we were still figuring out kind of what that looked like for us. But there's a fantastic Australian author named Frances Billinghurst, and I've talked about her a lot on different episodes, but she has a book called Dancing the Sacred Wheel, and she goes into a bit of the folklore and the history of each turn of the wheel, but also then completely relates it back to Australia
Mm-hmm.
and the
Mm-hmm.
native animals here and the flora and fauna that's native to Australia, and even breaks it down within that because across the country there are, like, if you go to Tasmania, it's a very very different
Mm-hmm.
climate to where I live at the top. And
Exactly.
so she'll say, like, she's in South Australia and she'll say, in South Australia this is what I see out my window, and this is, and really that is how I think we can really build a very personalized meaningful practice that makes sense for us and our families. And you're absolutely right when you say we also can't force our kids into boxes. Like, it's great if you have that Pinterest perfect, like, family situation going with your seasonal rituals and all of that. That's amazing, but for very few of us that is going to be the case. And so
Yeah.
I think, maybe you're the family who loves to craft at a table, and then maybe you're the family that, like, the kids need to be outside, so you are hiking that mountain and you are looking at
Mm-hmm.
all those trees, and then maybe you have a picnic at the top. But whatever it looks like for you, it needs to be relevant to your kids and their
Yes.
interests and your interests and what you also
Yes.
can handle together, because no one wants to be trying to kill each other on a family outing. So, maybe dad stays home and he does something else by himself. Who knows? But, I do talk
It
about
looks
that a
all
lot on
different
here.
ways.
Yeah, it's going to be, and it should be very personalized. And when you think about our ancestors as well, there were so many variations, even in dialect, between like regions that were
So
pretty
much.
close together. Like, the neighboring village would have
I
a
mean, I
slight
can
change in
tell you
dialect.
that like here in the town that I live in, there is
Mm.
and this is a small town, there is a line in this town where people speak one dialect of Sardinian, and on the other side
Wow.
of the line, they speak another dialect of Sardinian. So it is
Amazing.
like hyper regional. And I think since moving here,
Mm.
I've understood a lot more about how that is, because in the US, there are definitely regional differences, but the regions are bigger. And
Yes.
so you might not notice that as much because there's like New England, and that's like, 5 or 6 different states. And then you have like the
Mm.
mid-Atlantic. So it's much bigger regions.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas here, and just traveling to different countries within Europe is like, like you were saying, you can literally go to the next village and they have like different food, and they have different ways. They have like a different patron saint, and they have different,
Mm.
ways that they celebrate things. So you're absolutely right about that. And I honestly, knew that from reading about stuff, but it wasn't until moving here and like experiencing it in my own life to say, whoa, like this is a major component
Mm-hmm.
of thinking about all of this.
Yes. And so old ways and seasonal living are also two big buzzwords that, get thrown
Mm-hmm.
around, especially like, I don't know, I'm not on TikTok, but I'm assuming on
Neither.
TikTok, that's what I hear. And then on Instagram and really any social media platform, in people's newsletters, it's a buzzword, and it
Yeah.
attracts people. And it attracts people for a very genuine reason. It's because people are looking for a solution and they're looking to reclaim their roots. And that's really important. But then I don't like that, it gets kind of twisted a little bit and commercialized in a sense. So that's
Mm-hmm.
what I love about this conversation, is because this is demystifying what
Mm-hmm.
old ways and seasonal living mean, and slow living and intentional living. Because I say this all the time with like, the best way I can describe it to people is, I used to hear people say holding space, and I was like, what the does holding space mean? Right? Like, I couldn't in my
Mm-hmm.
brain wrap it around that. I was like, what is that? What does that mean? And then one day it just clicked in, dropped in, and I went, thanks, universe. Uh, if you picture, because for me, I'm very visual, so this made sense for me, but I'm a visual learner. If I could picture a room full of stuff, like an old storage unit, and it was just so full of stuff to the point where you open a door and things are starting to fall out.
Mm-hmm.
Like, think the cupboard in Cheaper by the Dozen #2, or whatever. So Cheaper by the Dozen, and so like she opens the hallway cupboard and all the balls and all the stuff fall out, because that was his version of cleaning. Like that, you can't fit anything new in there. Like, there's nothing, there's no peace, there's no serenity, and there's no learning or fitting anything new into that kind of space. And so I think about like, okay, we've carved out a space within this space, and we're going to hold that there and keep that there and not fill it with anything mindless. We're going to be intentional about what we do with that space. And for me,
Mm-hmm.
that really helped to like really conceptualize and understand what holding space meant.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
like, this is, I feel, the equivalent for like old ways and seasonal living is, it should be this
Yes.
nuanced, and it should be this minute and this focused. And people talk about, you want to eat seasonally and you want to eat local. This is the kind of stuff that it means, and it's not going to be an overnight process at all.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is a
Mm-hmm.
very slow process and a reclaiming of these practices and traditions and ways of living that's going to take probably hundreds of years, but
Yeah.
if not more. And so we're really like, it's a slow process, but every little thing you can do to start to work towards this, and also just to understand it, like, I hope this helps people to be able to picture, you know that you could be on different sides of a village, of a tiny village, and speak two different languages, and
Mm-hmm.
that is a beautiful thing. And so let's look around in our immediate environments and learn from the land, and learn from the land that we're on, instead of
Yes.
driving 2 hours even to go to a really cool place and go, oh, the trees here are so magical. Like it, it isn't as glamorous, right? I think that that's something that gets
That's true.
lost in the glamour. But like, let's pull back from the glamour and the social media and getting caught up in the rat race, and just literally take a step outside our door, and learn from that. And so thank you
Yeah.
for sharing that. And are there any challenges you've
Sure.
had like weaving this in with children? Is there something that your kids haven't taken to, or that is a growth process for you guys in regards to raising them in this kind of way? Like, do they get caught up with kids at school, and is that confusing for them, or anything like that?
You mean because they have different belief systems than the
Yeah,
kids at
yeah.
school? Yeah, I mean, the one good thing, I guess, is that, yeah, I mean, I think it's part of her autism is like she just doesn't really care like what other people are really doing. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think she's even said that she's told some people that were pagan, which I was like, ooh, okay, because,
Oh.
this is like a very Catholic country. I mean,
Oh,
everybody
okay.
goes to church. Like they're going to church on Sunday. I get on the
Mm.
moms list because everybody who's in a school, I'm sure, can relate to this. There's the WhatsApp lists, and I get
Mm.
the WhatsApp, lists like, oh, confession tonight is at 3 o'clock. And so like, it's, it
That's
is like a
strong.
thing. It's
Mm.
very strong. But the one thing that's nice about Sardinia, I think, is just the fact that because there are so many physical monuments and representations of the pagan past, like people are also
Mm.
really comfortable with the fact that, there is like a strong, ancient Sardinian spirit that's still very much alive and well. So
Mm-hmm.
it's one place that I've really seen have a beautiful blending of all of those things together, and everybody's kind of okay with it.
Mm-hmm.
But my kids, like, especially with my son, it's difficult sometimes, when I want to do like some set activities and he just can't sit still. Like he just
Right.
doesn't, want to sit and even listen to like a
Mm.
story or like, complete an activity. And so I try to make sure that there's always something that he can be doing that's using his hands the whole time, because if he has like something to keep his hands occupied, he's able to focus a little bit more. It also makes him like an amazing, anything that we do or we have to make something out of bread, like whether it's, like we make bunny breads for the spring equinox or,
Cute.
whatever. He's like my guy. He's the guy who's going to take charge of that. And he's even like come up with his own designs sometimes,
Mm.
to make the shapes. And so I think, again, it's kind of my philosophy now, which is like play to the strengths of
Mm-hmm.
everyone in the family and make sure that whatever we're doing, kind of like everybody's strengths and weaknesses are taken into the measure before we decide on what we're doing.
Yeah.
Because that, and then of course, and then if people just, maybe even we do that and we make all the plans and we keep everybody as part of the focus,
Mm.
there's still many times where they're just like, Mommy, I'm bored. Mommy,
So
I'm
glad to hear
bored.
that.
Yeah. And you're like, what? How can you possibly be bored? Like, this is so amazing. And they're like, oh, I can't even deal with this anymore. So,
Oh.
just being able to have the flexibility to say
Mm.
even little doses, 5 minutes, a recognition of something like the spring equinox, just saying, wow, you know what this is? Like, this is the time when it becomes spring. Like, now the season is spring.
Mm-hmm.
And here it's like springs are the most amazing. Like growing up on the East Coast of the United States, I have always been such an autumn girl
Mm.
because the changing of the leaves and the colors and everything is so beautiful. Autumns here are awful. They're rainy, gray, there's nothing. But spring now has become my autumn, which I think is really fun because it's kind of like what we were talking about before. It's like on the
Mm.
exact opposite end of the wheel, right? So it's
Mm-hmm.
like the autumn equinox and the spring equinox. And this is like where the colors really shine here because there's a million different kinds of wildflowers and birds coming in. And so I think even small doses like that, just getting with your kids and kind of like, showing your enthusiasm
Mm-hmm.
for what most people take for granted and just like look at and say, oh yeah, whatever, there's like a bunch of flowers. But I get really excited about it. I'm like, oh, look,
Oh, me too.
today like the roses came out and oh my gosh, I've been waiting for this bud that's been so tight. Like every day it's opening a little bit more. And now it's fully open. Let's go look at it. I've been waiting for you to come home from school because I want to show this to you, and even if that's all we do, I
Yeah.
feel like it's still kind of like marking the season. It's still saying this is what's changing in our landscape. And as the years go by and they become more tolerant of spending more time in these things, and I've noticed it with my own kids from when they were like very little toddler age to now, they have more curiosity and they are more patient and they're more interested in learning a little bit more about it. And so I think if I would say anything to anyone, it's just don't get discouraged if all the plans that you have are not well received by your little guys. Just really be like, 5 minutes is enough.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're
Yeah.
building on that year after year after year. It's not like 5 minutes and you're never going to talk about it again. It's going to come again next year and the next year and the next year. And you just keep building upon it little bit by little bit.
Yes, that's definitely like the seasonal observation practice that I talk about a lot is, we have a maple tree down the road and I walk my baby since he was born. I would walk under it and go, look, it's green. Look, it's turning amber. Look, the leaves are falling off and now they're brown and crispy. And now look, they're starting to grow again. They're popping out and shooting out. And, he's a year and a half now and he's always looked at it, but now he's walking, he wants to go touch the leaves. And that's really, if nothing else, that's going to embed in him this noticing, this instinct to notice the world around him and be in connection with the world around him. Even if he doesn't think it's cool, even if he thinks it's dorky, he won't be able to help it because it's just going to be ingrained in him. And that's not in like a weird dictator control-y way. It's just going to give him that gift of really being in touch with nature, which I never think is a bad thing for people. I think that we could all use more of that. Even as adults, even being on a path like this, we all find ourselves rushing through our day at some point and not even noticing that it's dropped 2 degrees or whatever it is. And so, I think also having the kids to help us to slow down and pay attention is helpful. And so are there any particular celebrations that you guys celebrate that you love? Like, is Easter your jam? Do you do special things specifically? Is Easter your favorite as a collective family, or, is there something that you really love?
I would say Yule is probably the favorite. I mean, I wrote a whole book about it, so I guess it's like probably a big area of expertise of mine and something that a lot of people know me for, because it's my favorite. It's like I said, I've always been sort of like an autumn and winter girl, and I was born in December, so I love snow and just everything about it. So I think my kids get really excited about it too, because, there's all of the figures, the important figures of that time of year, like Santa Claus and the reindeer, and just sort of like all these animistic figures that I think really draw a lot on ancient mythology and ancient practices. I have a whole podcast episode about that if anybody is interested in that at the Yuletime season, about my take on the figure of Santa Claus, because that's another thing that comes up a lot in our line of work, I think, is people's opinions about whether that is something that we should introduce to our children. And if we do, how do we do it? And some people get really fired up about it.
Yes.
I do too, but probably not in the way that most people do. So I will just leave that little nugget for people if they want to go check that out at some point.
It out.
But I feel like that is because it's also a time that coincides, because I'm sure that this is something that a lot of people listening experience if they're not able to homeschool their children, is like a lot of these celebrations happen when kids have to go to school. And so Yule is definitely one of those times where the family is able to be all together. And my family, I think my kids usually get out of school like on the 21st or 22nd. So we almost get the full like 12 days of Yule as a family together and then beyond. So it's a time I think where we really can do a lot of the activities and celebrations and rituals that we want to do because we're all home together
Mm-hmm.
and there's time and space for that. And that makes it special too, because it's like you're not trying to do these things when it doesn't make sense. So for example, you were asking about like the spring equinox and Easter. We do a lot of our spring equinox celebration when my kids have break for Easter.
Mm-hmm.
I don't necessarily always do it at the equinox because there's just not time. They're in
Yeah.
school and when they get home they're tired and they don't really want to be like having a whole evening of activities, and frankly neither do I.
Yes.
um, so we might save some of the special things that we do and do them during their Easter break.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that just makes it better. So that's another thing that we could say about all of this is like you don't have to do it on the exact day that the wheel of the year says that these things are, because again, it was never like that for our ancestors. They did
No.
things according to what was happening in their landscape, and so you also can wait to do those things for times that are more appropriate and convenient for your
Mm.
family.
Yeah, and I think something a lot of people don't know is that the Wheel of the Year and the way that kind of we speak about it is, I believe, a Wiccan construct. So it's actually
Yes.
quite modern. It's not actually old ways at all. And that's why we're talking old ways, but we mentioned the Wheel of the Year as more of like it's a great visual representation uh of how the year flows, and it derives from celebrations that our ancestors had, and important points throughout the year that they marked and celebrated as sacred. But the wheel itself is just a wheel. It's just something that somebody came up with. And that's very Wiccan to have correspondences and to, you know, to build something in that way where you can go, yes, there's a defined rule about that. But that's actually, you know, it's, you know, it's a tool we can use, but it's not something that we should necessarily live or die by. And that's,
Yeah,
comes back to that seasonal
exactly.
practice again of like, noticing what's going on around us. And I think also very practically for parents specifically, like I'm loving all these conversations with, pagan or old ways parents, in that we have to be realistic. And it seems like some big magical intense thing, and it is magical and it is intense, but it also has to be practical for your family because you are living every day, and
Yeah.
it has to make sense. It has to fit in a way that feels good and aligned. And so Holly, who I did an episode, I actually recorded with her a couple of days ago for episode number 2, but the first one was very much about integrating witchcraft with children. And she is a very Celtic background as well, and she practices a more old way style of spirituality with her daughter. And she always says, like, we have all these plans and we will put stuff in the calendar, however,
Yeah.
sometimes you get there and you're like, I do not have a full feast in me. I do not have, this craft and this celebration and this, outing. I don't have it in me. We're both exhausted. The term has got us. Work has just stripped me bare and I just don't have anything left. And the kids
Yeah.
probably feel the same. And so, in that case, she's like, we'll make a loaf of bread and we'll put a slice on the altar and we're done. We'll watch a good
Yeah.
movie that's kind of aligned for the season and we'll do it together, and maybe light a candle, and that's it. And sometimes that's great, and then sometimes we go and we do the full shebang, and that's great too. And so whatever you guys have the capacity for at the time is going to be beautiful. It's just that intentionality of taking just a moment even out of your day to recognize that the wheel is turning, the cycles of the earth are turning and moving, and just again holding space for that, right? Like just
Yeah.
recognizing it and just sitting with it for a moment. And that's also, I think, going to help kids love it more because there's not so much pressure, and it's not like, oh,
Exactly.
mom's making me go and like do this ritual. Like no one wants that.
Nobody wants that, because that's what that's what a lot of us, were raised or brought up in, and
Mm,
trying to get away from by doing these things with our families differently. So we have to kind of also realize where the patterns of our upbringings are still strong in us, where it's like, no, we have to do this thing because it's
mm,
this book said, or this person said, or and that's why I try to say, like, in all of my writings, or like if I'm talking to somebody or whatever, is just like, you got to take everything with a grain of salt, even what I'm saying, especially what I'm saying, because I'm coming, from my own life experience, from my
mm-hmm.
own upbringing and my own growth. And it may look very different from you. And so what I'm saying might not, some of it might jive with you and some of it might not jive with you. Take what works and just, leave the rest, because
Mm-hmm.
we're all still trying to figure it out. There are no experts in this. This is just people who are dedicated to figuring it out for themselves and for their families. And most of us knowing and realizing by this point that we will not ever figure it out. And that it's just part of the process of, learning, and just, we're all like we were talking about with the Wheel of the Year, and sort of the origins of that coming from Gerald Gardner, who was the Wiccan, one of the first Wiccan people. And I look at him, and you hear a lot of stuff going on, especially this time of year with Ostara and the goddess Estre Ostara and the Grimm brothers. And, did, you know, did they really have a do they really have a case for whether this goddess existed or not? And I'm always trying to remind people, like, those guys, the Grimm brothers, Gerald Gardner, all these people, they're us.
Mm,
They were just people who were trying to figure out the ways of their ancestors and to
mm-hmm.
make something in a way that could maybe help other people access that as well. So creating the Wheel of the Year, no, it's not an ancient Wheel of the Year, but it's like somebody's invention who had probably a lot of the same hopes that we have of bringing this more to the forefront and bringing these ideas back in a more tangible way.
Mm-hmm.
That was just like a tool that they created to try to help people who wanted to do that.
Exactly.
And so in a way, we can look at these people not with disdain and like, oh well, they're this and that. It's like, no, they just were really just trying to do kind of the same stuff that we're trying to do.
Yeah. It was just a translation exercise, really. It's just
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah. And I really, before we run out of time, I want to touch on land spirits and nature spirits
Mm.
and home spirits. And, what's your relationship with these beings, and what role do they play in like a family home?
Mm. I really feel like they are the heart of so much of what I do, because a lot of the things that I do really relate back to the home and
Mm-hmm.
family life. And so I feel like they are sort of the symbol of that in a lot of ways. And so, like, for example, the Yule book that I mentioned that I wrote, all of the illustrations are of gnomes, or I guess you call them house elves or house spirits or tomten. Every
Mm-hmm.
culture has a different name for them. Um, because they really just came so strongly through for me as beings that have always been around, much like ancestors and gods and and they really want to be useful. Like, they want to be useful to us again. And the way that they can become useful for us again is by, number one, us acknowledging the fact that they exist in the first place, which not a lot of people know about that right now. And so they're trying to make a comeback, I guess you could say. Uh, and I'm
Come
in
back
full
into
full
Tompkins.
support of it. Yes. So I'm like totally in support of that, and I try to like get their image and things out about them as much as possible. Like, I know some people are familiar with the fact that I make them, like, I needle felt tomtons and
Oh,
gnomes,
cute.
and and I've been doing it for a long time. And I love giving them to people. And so many people have just told me stories of like how they make a special place for it and they give it offerings and like the amazing things that have happened in their lives when they started doing that. I mean, it's a thing. I mean, it really is a thing. So I feel like these are the beings that are probably the most accessible and most really open to our desire to communicate with something of the other world because they live with us. Like we share space with them, and they want to help because that's what they are here for. You know, they're here to be in relationship with us. And so I think like a lot of times when people are starting maybe down a pagan path or, looking into this kind of stuff and they're like, oh, like I want to create like a relationship with the other ones. And, like what God should I try to get in touch with? It's like, well, first of all, either start with the ancestors or your house or domestic spirits, land spirits, house spirits, because they also are invested in having a relationship with us like right off the bat because we live together. And I think it's a really great way to actually introduce kids to these more esoteric concepts that are often really difficult for kids to understand, obviously, because it's difficult for a lot of adults to understand as well. A cute little image of, because I needle felted this first like tomten that I made for my daughter when she was like 2. And we started in the Yuletide season giving offerings, but then she liked him. So we kept him out and we kept giving offerings. And still to this day, she's 11 years old, if she loses something, she will like go and give a treat to the little gnome that we always have out and say, can you help me? And I swear to you, every single time this thing is found. And it's not found like under a couch cushion or something like that. It's like in the middle of the floor where you walked by 50 times. You walked by there 50 times looking for this thing. And now all of a sudden it's just there.
Yes.
I don't know how to explain that beyond the fact that these guys are there. They're here with us and they want to be helpful and they want to be with us.
And I think the important thing to know as well for people is the converse of that. If you're not respecting your home spirits, your land spirits, they will mess with you. And that is when the car keys just disappear and you go, what the hell? I can't tell you the number of times my keys have been dismantled. Like my key rings just are still intact and then the keys are not on the key ring anymore. One day it happened so many times I ended up literally with one key left on my key ring and all the accessories and all the fun things I have on there too all off. They just kept falling off everywhere I went and I went, come on, what have I done? So I think I think it's important to know that you have choices and you can work with them and love them and respect them, or you can not, and
at your own peril.
Pick your battle.
Exactly.
So I think so I guess for people to understand it who maybe don't understand it, and also for me to know kind of where your thought process is with this, do you feel that that nature spirits, land spirits, home spirits are on the same plane as us? Do you feel that they're on a different plane? Like what's your understanding of actually where they're residing?
I think to me, it feels energetically like they are sometimes here on the same plane as we are. It's just I don't think it's even that we can't see them because there's something wrong with us. It's just that they are so much a part of like the physical environment that it's really hard to see them. It's like a camouflaging almost, because I know that like animals, pets in the house can often know when they're around, even when you don't see anything. And so I think that's what makes me think that they actually inhabit the same space that we do. But I also think that they can go to sort of a parallel place. Like, I don't know if you haven't, and if your listeners haven't, seen or watched the Netflix show Hilda?
No.
Do you know about this show? Okay. There is a show called Hilda. It is a
Okay.
Netflix show. It's an animated show
Uh-huh.
about this girl who basically it's really hard to describe it. She lives in a world where a lot of these spirits, especially from like Norse mythology, live with us. So there's trolls, there's tomtins, there's, all kinds of nature spirits that she has to like kind of interact with. It's a girl. She's like 9 years old or something. And she like is in all of this stuff. And the way that the show shows the tomtins is a way that that really aligned with me when I saw it, is
Yeah.
like they inhabit all of the spaces in your house where it's like hard to describe it. Like they live like behind your outlet, for example.
Oh,
Like
okay.
the space, like the spaces in your house
Yeah.
that are like, but then that space expands into like this giant universe.
Oh, that's
So
so
it's like
cool.
almost like a black hole kind of like thing. So they can go in it, they can travel through it. So they can go like, to one person's house to another person's house like really fast, but it's not like they're teleporting. They're just using these
Yes, space
spaces,
works
the
differently.
in-between spaces.
The
Yeah.
liminal spaces. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's really cool. And I definitely 100 recommend that show to watch also with your kids, because
Totally gonna check it out.
it brings to life so many of these concepts that we're talking about in
Yeah.
ways that are like fun, but also like really respectful of the actual beings themselves, and the fact that those beings also have their own cultures and their own ways of being in the world as well.
Yeah.
So Hilda, gotta watch it. It's
That's
amazing.
a great recommendation. And, I think I kind of ask these questions because, again, for my kind of, neurodivergent brain, I really need to, especially when they're more spiritual concepts. It's so weird. I'm such a weird mix of like like spiritual, energetic, and then like show me the proof. I want the study. And it's hard because I have to like, I'm constantly like rationalizing with myself and trying to like cognitively understand something that sometimes really isn't very cognitively understandable. And so, I love also to kind of bring this to a place where people who are listening, who also maybe just like literally have no background or understanding of any of this stuff, can come in and understand it in a really good way. Because, again, the internet is where we go now for information. We're not going and checking out books. We're not having mentors in the way that we used to. And we're not connected with our ancestors and our lineage like we used to be. So, the internet is not right all the time. I can say that. And for sure, this new AI integration for Google is wrong. Like at least 50% of the time, I'm trying to figure out how to turn it off. But things that I know about, I see it typing incorrect information. And so, the internet is not always the best place to find out this kind of stuff. And so being able to present it to people in a way that maybe, is more digestible and, is also like firsthand experience from somebody, I think is really helpful. And it's also helpful for me.
I agree.
But have you seen any with your own eyeballs? Or do you feel their presence and you get to see their antics?
Yeah, I have seen them. I have seen them. Mostly, I'm also in an altered state though. So like when doing trance work or just kind of like allowing the mind to slip. I don't know how else to describe it, but I call it like a mind slip. For like, it could be for like a second, or it could be for a minute, or it could be for like 30 seconds, but it's not like a long period of time where all of a sudden you're just like, oh, hi there, and that's how I figured out about the camouflaging, was because it's like I could see them, but I knew that if I looked away for a second, I wouldn't be able to pick them out again. Because it wasn't because they were hiding or anything like that. It was just mainly a whole thing of like, they are just so much looking like where they are. It's like a mimetizing effect. That it's like, that's why they're so connected to the home and to the environment of the home, is because like they are literally it, but also not it.
I think also like our brains, we're not, again, this, this conditioning we have, like, again, going back to kids seeing spirits, a lot changes in our brains past the age of 7. And if we're not nurturing that type of
Mm-hmm.
vision and nurturing our ability to connect with and see these spirits, I think it just takes a lot longer and a lot more hard work to bring that back into our consciousness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I think that
It's
it's,
also words too. It's like,
mm,
there's a difference between when you have an experience like that and there's like a knowing,
mm,
and then there's also like trying to put it into words to explain it to another person, which I
yeah,
think that there's just sometimes we don't
not
have the language for it.
totally.
Um, and so I think there's a lot of that too, which is why I really think it's so important that people trust their instincts, their
Mm,
intuition, and their gut, because those are the things, those feelings that you can't describe and put words to are so valuable and so important to listen to,
mm-hmm.
because we don't have the words to describe them. Like somebody cannot tell you sometimes the things you need to know, but a feeling can,
Mm,
or like a color can, or a sensation can.
mm.
It's like the fascinating thing talking to my daughter about how she is like a certain color sometimes taste is a taste instead.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
So it's like trying to explain that to a person that's never experienced that, saying, hey, purple tastes like soaps and like soap and something, and you're just like, what? But
Yeah.
for her, she's like, yeah, like, what do you mean, what? How can you not understand this? And
Mm,
it's a translation. It's like a trying to put something into words that was never meant to be explained. It's just supposed to
yes.
be.
Yeah.
And so people just trust yourself, trust your body, because your body, like your skin and, your flesh and your bones, like these things are able to understand things in a visceral way that don't always have explanations and words like us humans would prefer them to have. So you kind of just need to really like trust those feelings, and you may never know why, like you may never
Mm,
know why you had this like gut reaction to not go somewhere one day. Like it's
mm.
not like all of a sudden you're going to watch TV and they're going to say, oh, there was a huge accident, and you're like, oh
Yeah.
wow, now I know. You may never know why, but
Mm.
just trust that
It's
that
divinely
message is
guided.
for you, and you got to do
Mm.
it.
Yeah, look, we don't want to end up like me who didn't listen to that instinct and got her finger in a blender. So let's
Oh
not be
my.
like me.
Let's not
Let's
do that. That
trust our
sounds horrific.
intuition. Like when
Ooh,
you're
yeah.
just like, I really, I don't have time for that. I'm forgetting it. And then, like you go, no,
Mm-hmm.
I have to do that thing. My schedule says so. And it ended
Nah.
badly. Um, so
Yeah.
let's take a
No.
lesson from Hannah, guys. Don't do that. Just listen. There's a reason you're getting those messages. So, are there any tips, concise tips you could give people starting out on their journey with connecting with nature spirits? Is there a way that, again, the leaving offerings to kind of
Mm-hmm.
a,
Mm-hmm.
a, a figure or, physical representation, you know, do you set a place for them at the table? Like, what is it that are there a couple easy ways that people could start to approach that connection?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think offerings is always the best way to acknowledge another being, and like have it be something that you would want to give any other guest, even though these are not guests. But I always like to think of it as like, give the best that you have,
Mm,
when you're giving offerings, because it's kind of like, if you had a guest coming and you wanted to really like make them feel special and seen and
mm-hmm.
loved and appreciated, you don't give them like a crust of bread that you found on the countertop, but and it doesn't even mean that you have to make something. But like, for example, I live in Sardinia. Honey is like a very important part of the culture of
Mm-hmm.
in many different ways. And so a lot of times I offer honey to land spirits and my house spirit because it's something that they understand and appreciate. And I always use like the highest quality, the best one that I have. And especially when it's like the last bit in the jar because I've been hoarding it. And I'm like, oh, okay, I'm going to give it to you because,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I really love and appreciate you. And I think another really fun way to involve kids is, you know, creating fairy houses
Oh,
out
yes.
of natural materials or out of, you know, using things that they no longer use anymore, like toys that they might not use anymore, and as a way to just sort of recycle and upcycle things and give them a new use is making a little home for them outside or inside and just saying like, you know, this is just a place that I created for you because I want you to know that you're welcome here and so I want you to know that I understand that this is your home too, and I want you to
Mm-hmm.
have like a cozy cute little space to be in. So yeah, I think those are probably like the two easiest, most accessible ways. One is like a very simple hands off, just offering the best of something that you have. And one is a little more hands on if you want to kind of like make a ritual or like a craft or an activity with your family to involve, is like making a really nice fairy house.
Oh, I think they're both beautiful suggestions. And I always just like to give the disclaimer though, if you put a fairy house or a fairy door inside, just remember you're definitely cementing that like portal doorway. So just, you know, also
Mm-hmm.
just conscious of that because I did put a fairy door in my house and the
Uh-huh.
activity just was like shoo. And so I think like I didn't really think it all the way through and it was beautiful and I only took it down because I had to, but it is just something like if you're not feeling prepared for that, just, you know, maybe
Mm-hmm.
start with
Mm-hmm.
outside because if you're not in a
Mm-hmm.
place where you can really like start to build that relationship, you know, it's a
Yes.
little chaotic. So uh
It can be because it's kind of like as if, you know, a person had been sitting in your house the whole time that you've been there and everybody just walks by them
mm,
and doesn't see them, and then all of a sudden you do something, you show a gesture that shows that you see them, they're going to be like, oh, you see me? Oh, well, let me show you this. Well, let me show you that. Well, let me show you know,
yes.
and it gets like into all this playful chaotic energy because it's like, oh my god, somebody finally sees me,
Mm-hmm.
like, yippee, let's have fun.
But I think like I really hope that we have some listeners go and like, you know, experiment and build a fairy house and, you know, start to build these connections because I think it's definitely again one of those pieces of our history that we're missing, especially if you're coming from a Celtic background. There's such a long history there with the fair folk
Oh yeah.
and, you know, these nature spirits and home spirits.
They
And there's
exist in every culture, I'm telling you.
mm,
So like don't feel like you're appropriating anything if you decide
yes.
to do that because they're literally in every culture, which tells you something very important, which is that
Mm,
this is like a global experience.
yeah.
So it lends more credibility for those who want to have validation of certain
Mm,
things. There's your
absolutely.
validation.
Absolutely. And so, if people want to get in contact with you, if they want to work with you, what kind of offerings do you have going? How should people best contact you if they want more Jen?
They want more Jen. Um, oh God. Well, I would say
Not to freak you out.
um, good luck to them. But no, I would say the best place is my website, which is jencampusauthor.com.
hmm
Jen with two N's, jencampusauthor.com. Everything can be found on there. I'm always like putting articles, like blog post style articles. I have lots of offerings every month, also through my Patreon. And I always make sure that every month there is a wide variety of free and subscriber, like paid benefits, because I
hmm
really, one of the most important things about anything that I put out there is that it is accessible to anybody who wants them. And so I have different ways of getting information out to people who, you know, maybe cannot afford to buy my book or, you know, take a class with me or whatever. There's going to be free resources. All you have to do is become a Patreon member, but just a free Patreon member. You don't have to pay
hmm
anything. You just become a free member and you get access to the things that are free. And I think that's good too. I would highly recommend that, and that you do that with anybody that you're thinking about working with, is try some of the free offerings that they have so that you can decide whether it's a good match for you.
Yes.
Because, not everybody is for everybody, myself included. And so I like to offer things so that people can get little tastes of what I do so that they know whether they want to do something more with me or not. And I'm great with it. I'm great with it either way. So,
and you have a course, am I right? Modern, Old Ways for Modern Families course, is that correct?
Yes, I do. And I really am planning to kind of revamp that. So right now, the course as it is, I think, is available through Patreon at a discounted price. I've also lowered the price because I'm planning on upgrading it. I don't know when, maybe next year, but it is there. And it is really what we talked about. It's really for how to kind of shift perspective and put on a more ancestral or animist lens on how to see the world, and ways to incorporate that into family life like as seamlessly and easy as possible. So if you're interested specifically in a lot of the stuff that, Hannah and I have been talking about today, that might be a really good resource for you. And I hope it is.
Yeah, and if that is more accessible, then folks go and take advantage of that and join Jen with that. And I will put all of your details as well in the show notes so people can easily find your website and your Instagram. And your website is so full of content. Like, there is so much on there. It's incredible. And your podcast as well. So there are so many ways to interact with kind of the knowledge that you're sharing and with you. So there are, there's an abundance of opportunity for everyone listening who wants to go and learn more about folklore and mythology and all of the things that you talk about, especially with old ways living and family life. So thank you so much for talking with us today. This is so fun, and I think people are going to get a lot from it. I think it's going to resonate with a lot of people, and I think it's going to help families to grow stronger together, especially in their spirituality and reclaiming their roots. So I hope that you enjoyed it as well, and maybe we'll be able to record another one in the future, and we can dive more into a specific topic. I'm already trying to rope you back in for round 2.
I'm here for it. I'm here for it anytime.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much again, Jen, and we'll talk again soon.
Okay,
Bye.
thank you so much, Hannah. Thanks. Bye.